Those who read this letter will be the most successful people today. I will be the one to provide you with knowledge, experience, and wealth. Most importantly, from this point forward, I will help you memorize the lessons of success in the shortest time possible. Share me with your friends so that together, we can become elite and build lasting wealth. The truth is, most people misunderstand this. They believe that financial success is a hard science, a cold world governed by mathematical formulas, intricate spreadsheets, and the rigid laws of economics. But the harrowing reality is that money is actually a soft skill, an unpredictable dance of ego, pride, marketing, and odd incentives that move the human heart in ways logic can never explain. In Morgan Housel's masterful exploration, The Psychology of Money, the narrative begins with two contrasting figures who embody the staggering power of behavior over intelligence. Imagine a man named Ronald Reed, a humble gas station attendant and janitor who lived a life of quiet obscurity in rural Vermont. He spent his days fixing cars and sweeping floors. Yet when he died at the age of 92, the world was shocked to discover he had amassed a fortune of over $8 million. He didn't win the lottery, he didn't inherit a cent. He simply saved what he could and invested it in blue-chip stocks, allowing the silent, invisible force of time to perform its miracles. Then, contrast him with Richard Fuscon, a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive, a man of immense intellect and pedigree who seemed to have mastered the world of high finance. Yet, driven by greed and a lack of humility, Fuscon over-leveraged his assets and collapsed into a humiliating bankruptcy during the 2008 crisis. The juxtaposition is chilling. A janitor became a philanthropist while a titan of Wall Street lost everything. This story shatters the illusion that wealth is about how smart you are. It is, instead, about how you behave. The psychological intensity of this opening reveals a fundamental truth about the human condition. Our relationship with money is less about math and more about the stories we tell ourselves. Housel explains that everyone has a unique money script written by the era they were born into, the socio-economic status of their parents, and the prevailing winds of the economy during their formative years. A person who grew up in the shadow of the Great Depression will view a stock market ticker with a primal fear that a child of the 1990s tech boom can never truly comprehend. The analytical weight here suggests that no one is actually crazy when it comes to money. They are simply making decisions based on a personal history that makes sense to them in the moment. The lesson learned is that luck and risk are the twin siblings of financial reality, and they are far more powerful than we care to admit. When we see a successful entrepreneur, we attribute their rise entirely to effort, ignoring the invisible hand of luck. When we see a failure, we blame it on poor character, ignoring the invisible hand of risk. By recognizing that the world is too complex for 100% of your actions to dictate 100% of your outcomes, a person can cultivate the humility necessary to survive the market's inevitable storms. As the narrative of financial behavior deepens, Housel introduces the most dangerous trap in the pursuit of wealth, the moving goalpost. The story of Rajat Gupta, a former CEO of McKinsey who rose from an orphan in India to the pinnacle of global business, serves as a haunting cautionary tale. Despite having a net worth of over $100 million, a sum that would provide more than enough for any human lifetime, Gupta wanted more. He wanted to be a billionaire. Driven by a desperate need to keep up with the titans of the Forbes list, he engaged in insider trading his reputation, his freedom, and his legacy for a bit of extra wealth he didn't even need. The tragedy of Gupta is a meditation on the concept of enough. The psychological strain of modern capitalism convinces the seeker that they must always be climbing. But Housel argues that the hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. Comparing oneself to others is a game that can never be won, as there will always be someone with a larger boat or a higher ceiling. The analysis of this segment focuses on the incurable hunger of the ego. When the individual lacks a sense of enough, they inevitably gamble with what they have and need for what they don't have and don't need. The lesson is that the most valuable thing money can buy is independence, the ability to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want. This is the highest dividend the money pays. However, To achieve this, one must suppress the urge to use money as a tool for social signaling. Wealth, Housel argues, is actually what you don't see. It is the cars not purchased, the diamonds not bought, and the first-class tickets declined. It is the financial assets that have not yet been converted into the flesh of consumer goods. This segment of the script serves as a visceral reminder that being rich is a function of current income, but being wealthy is a function of the hidden discipline to leave that money alone. The narrative moves toward the most powerful, yet most boring, secret of wealth, the staggering math of compounding. The story of Warren Buffett is often told as a saga of a brilliant stock picker, but the narrative of the psychology of money reframes it as a saga of endurance. Buffett is a billionaire because he began investing at the age of 10 and didn't stop for over 8 decades. If he had started at age 30 and retired at age 60, he would be a wealthy man, but he would never have become a household name. His secret wasn't just his return on investment, it was his time. Compounding is like a forest that takes decades to grow but can be burned down in a single afternoon of panic. The psychological intensity here is found in the counterintuitive nature of growth. The human brain is not wired to understand exponential math. We think linearly. We expect progress to be a straight line, but in reality, the vast majority of the rewards come at the very end of a long, arduous process. This requires a level of patience that feels almost superhuman in a world of instant gratification. The analytical focus here is on the survival mindset. To win at the game of compounding, you first have to survive the game. This means being financially unbreakable. Housel posits that a good investment strategy is not about maximizing returns, it is about being able to stick with a plan even when the world is falling apart. The lesson is that getting wealthy and staying wealthy require two entirely different skill sets. Getting wealthy requires risk, optimism, and putting yourself out there. Staying wealthy requires the opposite, humility, paranoia, and the realization that what you have could be taken away just as quickly as it arrived. It is the janitor's wisdom of Ronald Read, the realization that you don't need to be a genius to be wealthy, you just need to be consistently not idiotic for a very long time. This segment of the story emphasizes that cash is not a wasted asset, it is an insurance policy for your sanity, providing the margin of safety that allows you to stay in the market when everyone else is forced to sell. As the seeker moves through the labyrinth of their own biases, they encounter the irony of the man in the car. Housel describes a phenomenon where someone drives a luxury vehicle to signal their status. But the onlookers don't look at the driver, they only imagine themselves in the car. There is a profound disconnect between the desire to be admired and the reality of how others perceive wealth. This leads to the realization that humility, kindness, and empathy will bring more respect than any amount of horsepower ever could. The narrative then shifts to the psychology of the tail event. In finance, a tiny fraction of events accounts for the majority of the results. Whether it is the few days a year the stock market truly moves, or the few investments in a venture capitalist's portfolio that actually succeed, the tails drive everything. This means that a person can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune. The analysis of tail events reveals the internal game of failure. It suggests that we should not judge ourselves by our individual mistakes, but by our overall portfolio of decisions. The lesson is that the world is governed by outliers. Most of what happens in the financial markets is noise. The signal is found in the rare, extreme events that change the course of history. To be a successful investor, one must accept a high degree of messiness and failure along the way. This requires a shift from being rational, which is a cold, mathematical ideal, to being reasonable, which is a human, sustainable reality. A rational person might stay in the market during a crash because the data says so, but a reasonable person might sell a little just so they can sleep at night. The story of money is the story of managing for the sleep test. If your financial plan makes you lie awake in terror, it is a bad plan, regardless of its mathematical brilliance. The internal architecture of financial freedom begins to crystallize as the narrative explores the hidden price of success. Housel describes a world where investors look at the stock market's historical returns, perhaps 10% a year, and see it as a price tag, believing they can simply pay it and walk away with the prize. But the reality is that market returns are not a price, they are a fine. The psychological intensity of this realization lies in the emotional volatility that serves as the entry fee for wealth. Imagine an investor watching their life savings evaporate by 30% in a single week. To the rational mind, this is a temporary fluctuation. To the human heart, it feels like a physical assault. Most people fail because they view this volatility as a sign that they have done something wrong, rather than seeing it as the inevitable fee for the chance to achieve long-term growth. The story of money is the story of training oneself to endure uncertainty tax without flinching. The analytical weight of this segment focuses on the illusion of control. We believe we can predict the future. But Husserl argues that the most important part of any plan is the plan for when the plan isn't going according to plan. This is the margin of safety, the psychological and financial buffer that prevents a single mistake from becoming a terminal catastrophe. The lesson learned is that pessimism sounds smarter and more plausible than optimism, which is why we are so easily seduced by prophecies of doom. A pessimist tells you the world is ending, and they sound like a genius. An optimist tells you things will get better, and they sound like a salesman. However, the history of the world is a story of progress amidst chaos. To be a successful investor, one must cultivate a paranoid optimism, the ability to save like a pessimist while investing like an optimist. This segment of the script serves as a call to intellectual sobriety, encouraging the seeker to stop looking for certainty in a world defined by its absence. As the narrative moves toward the seduction of complexity, Husserl explores why we favor complicated solutions over simple ones. We believe that a problem as massive as wealth must require a massive, complex answer. Yet, the story of Ronald Read proves that the most effective strategy is often the most boring one. Complexity provides the illusion of control, allowing us to feel like we are doing something during times of crisis. But in the psychology of money, doing nothing is often the hardest and the most productive action possible. The narrative describes the tragedy of the professional, where experts feel compelled to tinker with portfolios just to justify their fees, often destroying the very compounding they were hired to protect. This leads to a meditation on social proof, the agonizing pressure to do what everyone else is doing, even when you know it's a mistake. The analysis of social proof reveals the hidden architecture of bubbles. Husserl explains that bubbles occur not because people are stupid, but because they are playing different games. A day trader and a 30-year investor might be looking at the same stock, but they are operating on entirely different timelines. When the long-term investor starts taking cues from the day trader, they are inviting disaster. The lesson is that you must identify which game you are playing. If you don't know your own timeline, you will inevitably be seduced by the noise of those who are playing a faster, more dangerous game. This part of the story emphasizes that true wealth is the ability to ignore the crowd. It is the internal fortitude to stay in your own lane, even when the lane next to you seems to be moving at light speed. The tension in the narrative now prepares for the final synthesis, the realization that money is ultimately a tool for a life well lived, not a scorecard for the ego. The focus shifts to the changing nature of the self. Husserl warns that we are poor forecasters of our future desires. The person you are today is not the person you will be in 20 years. Yet we make massive financial decisions, like taking on huge debt or choosing a career path, based on the preferences of our younger selves. This is the end of history illusion, where we believe we have finally become the person we will remain forever. The narrative describes the psychological liberation that comes from flexibility. By maintaining a high savings rate and low overhead, you give your future self the gift of choice. You give them the ability to change their mind. This is the ultimate option value of money. The story of money is thus a story of humility toward the future, acknowledging that we don't know what will make us happy in 2 decades. So we must prioritize room for error in all our calculations. The analytical focus here is on the power of savings. Most people believe that saving is a function of income minus spending. But Husserl argues that saving is actually a function of ego minus spending. You can build wealth without a high income, but you cannot build wealth if your ego grows faster than your bank account. The lesson is that savings without a goal is the most powerful form of wealth. It provides the optionality to jump on an opportunity or to walk away from a toxic situation. It is the buffer that protects your sanity from the tail events of life. This segment of the script serves as a visceral reminder that the best thing money can buy is time. Every dollar saved is a piece of your future that you own, rather than a piece of your past that you owe. The narrative is now poised for its final, powerful conclusion, as it prepares to tie the threads of behavior, time, and ego into a single, unbreakable philosophy of human happiness. The final movement of the human drama with money culminates in the epiphany of the ordinary. Morgan Housel brings the seeker to the ultimate realization that the goal of the game is not to be the richest person in the graveyard, but to be the person who has the most control over their own life. The narrative follows the seeker as they finally shed the skin of social competition, realizing that the rich man in the car was never looking back at them. The psychological intensity of this final segment lies in the freedom of disregard the moment a person stops caring about the status symbols of others and starts caring about the unseen assets of their own peace of mind. Housel describes his own financial life as one of extreme simplicity, emphasizing that he doesn't care about maximizing his returns as much as he cares about minimizing his regrets. The story concludes with a portrait of a life where money has finally been put in its proper place, as a humble servant to a meaningful existence, rather than a cruel master of a hollow one. The analytical focus of this final synthesis reveals that the psychology of money is actually a manual for internal resilience. Housel teaches us that the world is a chaotic, unpredictable place where tail events govern the outcomes and luck plays a massive, uncredited role. The lesson learned is that humility is the greatest financial asset. By accepting that we don't know everything, and by preparing for the margin of safety, we create a life that can survive anything. This is the endurance mindset, the understanding that the biggest gains go to the people who can simply stay in the game the longest. The narrative emphasizes that success in money is not about winning a race against others, but about finishing the race you started for yourself. It is the realization that a reasonable life is far more sustainable than a rational one, and that a good night's sleep is worth more than any percentage point of alpha. The core message and meaning that the psychology of money intends to convey is that your financial success depends far more on how you behave than on how smart you are. It reveals that money is a tool to gain control over your time, and that the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. The book serves as a brutal indictment of the ego, showing that wealth is the money you don't spend and the freedom you do keep. It teaches that the secret to long-term prosperity is not a brilliant discovery, but a boring, consistent discipline, the ability to be patient, to be humble, and to stay the course through the tail events of history. Ultimately, the book is a call to financial peace, where the goal is not to impress the world, but to own your own future. Doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave.